Coming up on the debut episode of Your Mind First and ACSA Mental Health Series, we're going to start having conversations around mental health because it's long past due, and there are a lot of things that we need to talk about. We're thrilled that you are with us. I'm Michael Kelly. Your Mind First starts now. Welcome into Your Mind First and ACSA Mental Health Series. My name is Michael Kelly. Thanks so very much for being with all of us. What a conversation that we're going to have today. Erin Simon, ACSA President, Gayle Garbolino-Mojica, Superintendent of Schools for Placer County, Buck Roggeman over in Pacific Grove Unified School District. The three of them will join us momentarily, in which we're going to start to have conversations around mental health and everything that comes with that. Because when you look at what is the next pandemic we're facing, it's mental health. So many of us, in some form or some fashion, have been impacted over these last couple of years. When you look at the statistics, they are very, very telling. 40% of the country was dealing with some form of anxiety or depression at the height of the pandemic. Those numbers haven't exactly come down. And so how do we get people to be more open, to be raw, to be vulnerable, so that we can really start to break down the stigma around mental health? That's what we're going to try to do over the course of these next 5 weeks. We're thrilled about the panelists who are joining us today. Next week, we'll have Jennifer Siebel-Newsome, California's first partner. We'll do 2 episodes on educator burnout. And then wrapping things up on August 30th, we'll talk about next steps for ACSA, where we'll be joined by Executive Director Edgar Zazueta. You've heard me talk long enough, so let's meet our guests, shall we? Erin Simon is the president of ACSA, also works as Associate Superintendent and Assistant Superintendent in Long Beach Unified School District. Gayle Garbolino-Mojica, Superintendent for Placer Schools. And Buck Roggeman, Director of Curriculum over at Pacific Grove Unified School District. They join us now on Your Mind First. Thanks so much for doing this. This is an absolute pleasure, and thrilled for the conversation we'll get to have.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I want to start off this conversation simply by asking, how are you? And I don't mean that in the sense of, how are you? I'm fine. Thanks for asking. I mean this genuinely, because if we are going to be open, and if we're going to be honest, and if we're going to be raw, then we have to start by sharing our own stories to some extent. So, Erin, let me start with you. I'm going to check in with you. How are you?
Well, first of all, let me just say hello to all of our ACSA members, our viewers, and to my esteemed panelists on this wonderful podcast today. And just say, you know what? Hey, I am blessed to be alive. I always tell folks, if my family's okay, if I'm able to breathe and get up every morning, that I'm going to be all right. But we also know that I can say for myself, getting through or still in the midst of a pandemic, right, has been difficult. But with self-care, learning how to take care of myself a little bit better, learning that work-life balance or life-work balance, whichever way folks like to utilize that terminology, I'm great. I've been traveling, visiting some regions, and I can tell you I'm optimistic, which makes me happy and makes me okay. So I'm good. Thank you for asking.
Gayle, you've had your hands full over these last couple of years. I just the added responsibilities that you've had to take on as a result of this pandemic as superintendent of schools for all of Placer County. How have you coped with all of it?
Well, thank you for having me here today to talk about this important topic. From the onset of this pandemic, I made a commitment that I was going to communicate to our staff in a clear way that was understandable, that would provide them information, and that I was always going to be uplifting and also real. So for about 18 months, 12 to 18 months, I delivered a video message to my employees weekly and gave them the updates that they needed to know. And then I shared with them how the pandemic had negatively impacted me as well. Whereas maybe I had some uncertainty, maybe I was worried about my parents who were in their late 70s, and I would share these vulnerabilities with my staff. And then I would end each video message with something that was positive that happened in my life that week because of COVID. And so that really helped me frame for people that it's okay to be scared, it's okay to be vulnerable, but there are some good things. I always reference the fact that I'm a mother of two grown kids, that one was in college and one was on his own. And both of them, for various circumstances, came back home during the pandemic for 3 or 4 months. And during those 3 or 4 months, we had dinner at the dinner table every single night and had conversations that we never used to have, and laughed about things that they did as kids or things that I didn't know about what they did in high school. And that was, I will always cherish those memories. And so for me, it was important to frame for at least my staff that it's okay to be scared. It's okay not to know what the unknown is. But there are some good things that can come out of COVID. And it was important for me to provide them a balanced perspective, and to let them know what to expect as we move forward. I didn't think we'd be moving forward in 2.5 years, but here we are. And I'm happy that I was able to carve out portions of my day to share that with my staff.
And you talk about it, Gayle, just trauma in so many different forms, right? And it's taken a toll on all of us in some form or another. Buck, you are a busy man, especially busy these days as you just transition from principal of an elementary school over into to district leadership in Pacific Grove. First of all, congratulations on the new position. I'm sure exciting in a lot of ways, but also probably a little bit overwhelming. Can you explain what the last couple of years have been like for you?
Sure. I think that one of the things that really stands out, first of all, is I'm humbled to be here with Erin and Gayle. I mean, they're amazing guests. And, the journey that we've all been on has been fascinating in that typically in life, we're used to, trauma comes our way that we can kind of isolate it and concentrate on one aspect of our life and try to heal ourselves in that area. I think that one of the things that came along with COVID was that whole idea that a lot of different phases of our lives were going to be affected. So when my daughter was a senior in high school and kind of going through, the tears in the morning of the loss of his senior year, and my wife was involved in that mourning process too, and I was at home, it made it difficult to maintain kind of that positive presence for staff. And just like Gayle said, one of the most important things was to be honest with folks, because we were all suffering together. And I think that one of the things that was the most important and maybe a positive thing that came out of COVID was our recognition of the necessity that we have for a connection with each other. When we have that connection with each other, then that whole flight or fight syndrome and the stress and anxiety of anger can sometimes be alleviated when we know that we got others that are in this with us. So I think that was one of the positive things that kind of came along in the last couple years. Now, my wife and I just drove to drop off my daughter at her apartment that she's going to be living in for this year in college. And it was interesting because when we dropped her off her freshman year, it went well, and we didn't really feel deep emotions of sadness, but this time we did. And we were trying to figure it out just exactly why. On the way back, we were going through a lot more tissue than maybe we did the first year. And I think it's because we were so happy that she was going to be able to go to college and be around people after being isolated her senior year. And when we dropped her off this time, she was in an apartment and her roommates haven't moved in yet. And so it was just her. And when we left her, there was a greater sense of separation from an empathetic standpoint from her perspective. And I think that's what we wound up feeling. Plus, she's really cool, and we're just going to miss her. So that's kind of how I'm doing right now, Michael. In addition to growing like crazy, which actually feels good.
That is a very good thing. I've got a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, so I've got a little bit of time before I send them off to college.
Brother, don't you blink, because it's
No.
going to happen before you know it. Yeah.
Man, that first year especially, you're like, where did it go? Just baffling. Buck talked on it earlier about just the role that the pandemic has played around the way that we think about mental health. And so, Erin, I want to go back to you through your interactions with students, with staff, even your own personal reflections. How has the pandemic changed, if anything, the way that you approach mental health?
I think it's changed the approach more significantly. And, let me just say this before I even just kind of delve into that. I'm passionate about it, but let me just say I'm not a scientist nor a clinician. My beliefs really stem from the work as a student support services educator. I believe for years, right, mental health has been a significant health crisis. Just for years, we've been talking about it. We've been talking about trauma. We've been talking about SEL, which I know is a little bit different from mental health, but all these things, right, to really help students, especially with their academic and personal growth. But I can tell you, COVID-19 has brought mental health into a sharper and deeper focus for many. I was just reading a study, I believe this weekend, by UC Irvine, to where they stated 1 in 5 adults received mental health treatment before the arrival of COVID-19, and how that has exacerbated. And then we know that our US Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, and I believe it was in December of 2021, he issued a rare public health advisory warning just to highlight, to center the rise in mental health problems among children and the urgent need to address the nation's youth mental health crisis. So I can tell you that, in the district, my size in Long Beach and with many others to that fact, we've seen an increase in suicide assessments. This year for us was the highest, I think, ever. You can combine 3 years together and still would not probably get to our total. So a lot of work we're doing around that with families. A lot of issues, even with our threat assessment, some things that we're cleaning up on that end. But just mental health in general, the behavior aspects, some behaviors that we're seeing in school as well, knowing that we need more staff, qualified staff, to interact, engage, and provide interventions and resources to our students and families. So I can say that it has grown exponentially, and hence why I know that many school districts, and this is ACSA's kind of work as well, working with folks to ensure you have the appropriate staff, that the interventions are even culturally responsive, engaging and having conversations, not being scared to have these conversations with your students, your parents, and communities around mental health. We know it's a stigma, but we need to talk about it because it's becoming more prevalent. And so with that, it's been challenging. It's been very challenging. But I think now that we have our data, our districts have data, our states have better data, our state, has better data, we should be able to act and provide the resources, which include staff, to truly assist our students and really make sure that mental health is prioritized, right, within everything that we do within public education. That is significant and something that I really want to push forward ahead with Dr. Edgar Zazqueda.
Gayle, you and I were talking prior to the start of the show about even something, and it's not simple, but when we talk about masking, that is a trigger word for you, right? That brings trauma to some extent because of what you've had to endure enforcing mask mandates. How, just looking at these last couple of years, how has your approach to mental health changed when it comes to yourself, when it comes to staff, when it comes to students?
So, it's the last 2.5 years, as I mentioned earlier, our global society has gone through trauma. And that trauma could be anywhere from you've lost individuals that you've known who's close to you to COVID, or they've been severely physically impacted. You may have had loss of wages. You may have had financial constraints on you, or just your daily routine has been upended. And that in itself is trauma. And how, as we've gone through these last 2.5 years, especially as school leaders, we have endured a lot of verbal attacks, I mentioned earlier, I've had 2 community members tell me that they've reported me to CPS for enforcing mask mandates. And for the life of me, I can't remember when I enforced a mask mandate, but you mean as far as physically putting a mask on a child? Never did that, but and I'm not saying that the report to CPS went anywhere, but it's been a heavy lift, and we as school leaders have endured more than I think we ever have in our professional careers during these last 2 years. Pre-COVID, I was very stereotypical superintendent. I had an incredibly busy professional schedule, and I had a less prevalent social, personal schedule, and my professional schedule really encroached on my personal schedule, meaning that I worked out, but I probably didn't work out enough. I didn't have self-care at the time. And, I kind of just took things for granted, or I'll unplug when I go on vacation in 9 months, or, on that long weekend when I get away, I won't respond to my emails. COVID personally has made me rebalance what is important to me. And my career is very important to me. But it doesn't have to be the only thing in my life. So I have found myself saying no now to commitments that are maybe a little outside of my scope. I used to be on, I think at one point I was on 5 boards, and maybe only 2 of them were education related. So there were a lot of community boards. So I'm saying no to those demands on my time. I'm spending more time exercising and eating well. I'm in my early 50s. And so this is when, if you don't start taking care of yourself, you're going to go downhill quickly. So I'm making sure that I keep not only my mental health, but my physical health. Because I think for a lot of us, the physical health and the mental health, there is a connection between that. And I feel better when I am active and I'm out in the open. I'm somebody who I don't like to go to gyms now because I am soured on gyms. And I had somebody who works in the medical profession say that he's going to put an in-home gym. And I'm like, you're brilliant. I don't have a spare bedroom, but, so I am kind of rethinking some of my behaviors. I am a mask wearer. And so when I travel, especially when I travel in the winter, I will probably wear a mask, because there were a lot of times I did get cold and did catch the flu when I was in DC in January on a plane. And so I am careful now when I fly on planes, especially for long hours. So, I think my behavior has changed. But I think that I recognize the fact that I have to be physically fit and mentally fit in order to be the best person I can be. And to be the best person that I can be, I have to have that balance. And so now that's much more of a priority for me than it was 3.5 years ago.
I'm 100% with you on this gym thing. The first thing that we did when the pandemic hit, I said, I don't think gyms are going to be open for a while. What did we do? We bought a Peloton.
I have a Peloton.
Yeah, me too. Hey.
Right. And it was just one of those things where I'm like, tell me the next time gyms are going to be safe to go in. And it's been great, and everything that comes with it. And now the Peloton bike has turned into Peloton meditations for me. So not that this is some type of Peloton plug or that we're trying to get this sponsored by Peloton, but it speaks to the need to promote mental health.
Well, and I actually know some home builders that are actually now, new designs now actually have Zoom rooms, and they actually have gyms. And I'm like, I could be into that.
Buck, how have you found healthy ways to disconnect through all of this?
Interesting, because I used to go to the gym too, and when COVID hit, I actually went online and bought a road bike and just started riding a bike, and so that's really been helpful too. And what I expected was the benefits that you feel from the cardio, but what was great to me was just the effect that it had on my mind. As I'm, biking around some of the incredible scenery that we have on the Monterey Peninsula, that not only was good for my mind and for my body, but also for my soul. And so I think that one of the keys for me in trying to keep myself afloat these past couple of years is really trying to start off my day in the healthiest way that I possibly can. So that's usually some kind of movement, whether it's biking or doing some kind of a HIIT routine in my living room. Also trying to do something that's going to tap into my mind and my spirit. A couple of books that I would recommend. One of them is called The Book of Joy. It's by Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama, along with Douglas Abrams. And it's an incredible book that just talks not about happiness, but really about joy. And what the author did was he spent 10 days with Desmond Tutu and Dalai Lama, and all they did was contemplate all of the different obstacles to joy that we face in our lives and the methods that we can use in order to try to surmount those obstacles and live a joyful life. So starting off the day in a really good, positive manner, and then also building those boundaries at night. And I tried to model that for my staff, that I would, grind and work and, hit the emails until about 6. But then when I got home to my wife and daughter, that was their time to have me. And selfishly, it was super healthy for me as well. And then there wasn't really anything that happened after 6 that I couldn't handle when I got to school at 7:30 or 8. So yes, you got to get up pretty early in the morning to do those kinds of things, but it's completely worth it because it's an investment in yourself. And yes, if you don't do it in your 50s, Gail, we go down in a hurry, don't we? And getting back is harder too. That's the problem. Is climbing out of the hole gets harder too.
We don't rebound like we used to do in our 20s and our 30s.
No, I dread the fall now. I used to be able to fall and bounce back up. Now I fall, I got to check first, and then I can bounce back. Totally.
Buck and I spoke a couple weeks ago, and he told me about the Book of Joy, and I immediately went and I have not read the book yet, but Douglas Abrams was on a podcast that Buck recommended, and it's fantastic. So anytime you can get the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu together, that's not a bad thing.
It's awesome.
It's pretty good.
I want to transition here to really what I think is a dangerous archetype around just people who are dealing with mental health and what that might look like. The reality is sometimes the people who are battling mental health issues are the people you would never expect. And so in that light, how have the three of you made sure that you are reaching out to everybody to say, like, hey, are you okay? Checking in with them and making sure that they have the support that they need. Erin, I'm going to start with you.
I think number one, just asking that question.
Sure.
How are you? Whether that's, in a public style setting or even privately, whether it's with staff or just many people that I know. And then just by listening, just always expressing and communicating the resources that we have to help them. And so like in a district, there are many resources that we have with our county offices, but also resources that we have within our communities, right? Those are publicly placed on our website. They're throughout my office, throughout several offices in the district. And I think we just have to be real and just be able to have conversations around it. We know that for some, it's still a stigma, but even having those resources out, tangible resources to where people can pull them and can utilize and make those calls on their own, I think is significant. I think also having just wellness webinars, resources, having rooms on campuses by which teachers and staff members can go into just to recenter themselves, go through a series of mindfulness. I think it's important. But again, we have to address it. We have to confront it. We have to have conversations, and we have to have the resources readily available for our folks as well.
Gail, how about you?
Since the start of the pandemic, I spent a lot of time liaisoning. I don't know if that's a word, but being the liaison between our school district superintendents, public health, state officials, and just our local community. And what I discovered is, especially with school leaders, we tend to be perfectionists. We tend to take a position where we have to be strong. We have to be not let anything ruffle our feathers. And I discovered that people respond to stress in very different ways. And in the way that I respond may not be the way that other people respond when they're under stress or they're dealing with something. People sometimes will shut down, and you have to kind of realize that may be atypical behavior for them in a normal situation. People are sometimes, when a period of uncertainty, they like to have control because they like being in control, and that's typically why they're leaders. Is And so when you don't have that uncertainty, you're grasping at control. So what can you control? And then you grab onto something and you can't let it go. And so it was interesting seeing how different people, and then some people lash out.
Yeah.
But if you're a professional, you don't lash out, right? And so I remember one time after a briefing I think I had with our district superintendents on Zoom, and it was just district superintendents and myself. So it was only like 16 of us on a call. And I remember just being like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired. I want to go, I want to just go, like roll up in a fetal position and take a nap. And this was like, during the first 6 months of it. And I had a superintendent call me and say, like, you're a leader. You're never allowed to be tired. And I was like, I pushed back and I said, yes, I am. We have been dealing with, unprecedented consequences here, and that you may deal with stress your way, but other people deal with stress other ways. And at that time, I was really tired. And I had been dealing, and I think it was during one of those, remember when we were having like every 2 days, we were having those press conferences and we were just kind of praying that there wasn't going to be any changes to like the current status quo that we were going to have to figure out on the fly. I mean, that was an exhausting time. And it was okay. And just to realize, that individual who said that to me privately, dealt with stress very differently than I deal with stress. And so with that, for our employees, right before COVID, we had an employee assistance program that was put in place. And we promoted that continually through COVID. And we really did see our employees take advantage of that service that's being offered. And just constantly talking about, taking care of yourself, because if you can't take care of yourself, then how can you take care of others?
Sure. And I think to your point, Gayle, anxiety and depression can manifest itself in so many different ways, strictly from a physical standpoint, right? It can be nausea, it can be fatigue, it can be stuff that you might not even expect, like skin burning or headaches, or for me, it was earfulness, just, bizarre things that you would never associate with anxiety. And yet that's what anxiety is for so many different people. Buck, I wonder for you, and I'm going to ask you to kind of take me back to your time as principal at the elementary school, because it had to be hard for you to watch teachers struggling to make sure that they were supporting their students the best way that they could, which is not always easy when you're having to do distance learning. And so how did you find ways to check in with them and make sure that your staff was okay?
Well, I think like a lot of the school leaders out there, I absolutely love our staff.
Yeah.
And you're right, Michael, that one of the greatest sources of anxiety for me was knowing that the staff was suffering. And so one of the things that I tried to do was recognize the signs of stress or anxiety in one of our teachers if they were starting to feel it, and then go to that person and start by just sitting and listening and giving the person, that opportunity to vent, to cry, to get to the point where they could almost laugh at the situation through tears in that painful kind of way. And just be another source of that emotional support that everybody needed throughout the day. And then the next thing was, if there was anything that I could do in my role as the principal to make the job more doable for our staff, I wanted to try to make sure that I didn't leave anything on the table in that regard, that I wanted to see my job from 8 a.m. until 3 p.m. as a complete devotion to of service to our staff, to do everything within my power to help them get through the next day. It's funny because when the end of the school year came last year, usually at the end of the school year, you're thinking, oh my goodness, I can't believe that the year went that fast. But I remember last year, about 6 or 7 weeks in, wondering if last year was ever going to end. And it's funny because I didn't expect the end of the school year to come, and our teachers didn't necessarily expect it to come. But boy, they sure didn't have a whole lot of people coming to me saying, I can't believe where that time went. It was a true grind, unlike any other that we've ever felt. And so what was beautiful about Forest Grove is that the staff does a great job of leaning on each other and supporting each other. And I just try to be another set of hands in that support network.
Erin, you spoke about it earlier, but you have been passionate for mental health well before the pandemic started, and have advocated for it. You presented on it.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about what the Surgeon General did, what Vivek Murthy did in December. It seems all but clear that this is the next pandemic that we're facing right now is mental health,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that accurate?
I would say it is. And I would just say, even for that, I think it has been, honestly, a pandemic for a long time. I just think that COVID has truly exacerbated the needs, and have really shown it in a deeper light, right? Has really centered and really focused the need to have more mental health support, right, in our society. I think it's also just kind of safe to say that we're seeing such a demand that it's hard for agencies, right, to keep up with that. So I know that we have several agencies that we use, right, within our district, even our county. I know that, Buck and Gayle may have the same, but even with those agencies that have been strong for so many years, even they are trying to find more staff to provide the supports that our students and staff need. So it's becoming problematic because the need has increased so much that the demand for staff, right, we can't keep up, with that as well. But, for me, I'm an optimist. I always believe there's hope. I think there's ways that we can work with our communities, right, to find ways to train more clinicians, to be more creative in how we utilize even clinicians, even within our schools, and things of that nature. I think what I've learned through this pandemic, even more so through the COVID pandemic, let me just be more specific, is that if we provide services for our students and families, even our staff members on campus, on site, it is much, and they're easily accessible. Our families, our students are more inclined, right, to take in those services, as well. So even though we're seeing this quick increase of mental health, limited, I guess, support kind of within our community just based on their limits, I think there are ways that we can still work and bring in those supports to our school sites to really help mitigate some things that are happening there. I mean, I always tell folks, school districts, we're the great equalizer, but there's also a lot that falls on our shoulders. And we know that if we leave it out for our parents and our students to go out and find that support, sometimes they're going to take advantage of that and sometimes they're not. But if there's a trusting adult right within our school systems that our students and our families, even our staff members, can easily tap into, they're more inclined to do so. And that's something that we've been really attempting to do within our district, to find, number one, timely support, easily accessible support that we know has been working with our families to tackle and mitigate what we are now calling the mental health pandemic.
And you talk about that need for more support, Erin. I mean, it's not just schools that need it, right? It's healthcare providers who cannot get people seen fast enough. You're talking about, for some healthcare providers in California, a 3 to 6 month wait, and they partnered with other companies. And I can tell you that those companies will send you a list of 10 therapists, and you call those 10, and either they don't accept, they've moved, or they're just too booked. And so we have to do more for students, for staff, obviously at the school site level, but beyond that, this is a nationwide, if not global wide thing that we have to do more to address it by getting more trained professionals to work with the people who most need it. Buck, absolutely. I know I keep going back to your time at Forest Grove, but the first time you and I connected, really the first true time, was talking about the work that you had done around mindful moments, in which, similar to what Gayle talked about earlier, you would put out a video for students on how to deal with stress and how to deal with anxiety. And to me, it was I get goosebumps as I talk about it, but it was so beautiful to watch because I knew the impact that it was having on those kids. What did you take away from your time creating those videos?
Michael, it grew out of mindful moments that we did before the pandemic at the end of lunch times. Staff had come to me and mentioned that the students came in from lunch kind of wound up after playing for a half an hour. And so they were wondering what we could do to help kind of focus and ground our students and get them ready for the rest of the day. So we started sitting down on the playground and starting off by taking a few deep breaths in and out, in and out. And then we'd wind up talking about one of the character-based messages that we wanted to share with our kids, really talking about how our students could be kind to each other. Sometimes we would ask them to try to think of something specific they could do to be kind for their teacher when they walked in the classroom, when they were getting ready to go in just a couple minutes. We would talk about how all of our lives were like beautiful streams that have all come together. Some of us may have been born in town. Some of us may have been born in different parts of the county, different parts of the state, different parts of the country, or even different parts of the world. And what a miracle it is that all of these streams have come together at this one moment, at this one time, for us to form what is Forest Grove Elementary School. And just to kind of build that sense of unity with our students so that they knew that they weren't alone. And so when COVID struck, we started to do the videos that would wind up sending the same kind of messages. And what was pretty amazing to me is, you can track on YouTube how many people are watching the video. And we had more than half of our school, tuning in and watching that. And what was really touching for me was when I would get feedback from the students or their parents saying how much they look forward to the mindful moments and how they actually felt like they got to know me a little bit better. Because on days when I'd be kind of going through my own difficult memories of either my brother passing away from cancer when he was 43 years old, or when we lost my mom sooner than we should have. There's students in our schools that are going through that same kind of thing. There are adults that were listening in that could completely identify with some of what I was talking about. And I think the more human that we make ourselves, the more people are going to be willing to open up to us and allow us to help them as well. And so, it really comes down to service and trying to build a connection with the people that we're with. And the only way to do that is to show how human we are.
On that note, always enjoy our conversations, but
me too, Michael.
Look, this stigma around mental health and this need to, I think back to an interview that Stephen Colbert and Anderson Cooper did after Anderson Cooper lost his mom, and Stephen Colbert talked about that. Look, suffering is a part of life, and that everyone suffers in one form or another, and so if you are grateful for your life, you have to be grateful for all of it. And it speaks to what you talked about, Buck, this need for community, because if all of us suffer, then you're going to be able to relate to each other and just to
Absolutely.
Be a better human or be a better friend or a better parent or whatever it may be.
Michael, and some of the greatest
to.
celebrations of family that we've ever had were in connection to, my brother passing, my mom passing, and my dad. I mean, it wound up being beautiful in its own way, even through the suffering. And if there's one thing all of us human beings have in common, it's that we're going to endure suffering in our lives. So if we can recognize the suffering in another person and try to alleviate it, as it says in that book of joy, that is going to be one of the greatest sources of joy in our life, is showing compassion for another person by easing their suffering.
Well said.
On that note, and I appreciate the three of you being so open about a topic that I think many are hesitant to talk about. And we have talked about stigma throughout the course of this, but and I think the fact that leaders in general are probably a little bit more hesitant to talk about mental health because they are afraid of the optics, right? Whether it is how your staff will react, whether it is how your students will react, there is trepidation at times. And so, Gayle, I want to start with you. How how do you find ways to have conversations around mental health so that we can finally start to break that stigma?
You know, it's interesting. Personally speaking, I had an interaction with an individual recently where they were going through a rough time, and and I had shared with them that, you know, I went through a rough time too. And they looked at me and they said, when? And I said, about 10 years ago, I had a life change that really caused me to take pause. I went through a divorce, and it forced me to just stop for a moment and reflect. And with that, I sought the help of a therapist that not only helped me reflect, but challenged me in ways where I became a better person. And because I became a better person, I became a better leader. And I have very fond memories of those years that I spent with a therapist helping me, you know, not only deal with a sudden life change, but also becoming a better version of me, and how that affected not only my professional life, but my personal life. And when I shared that with this individual, they were astounded that, you know, that I had gone through that, because they said, you're always have everything well together, right? Like, you're a leader of an organization. You're, you know, you're not a, you know, you're not, you know, doing crazy things. I mean, you're well put together on all sorts of levels. And I said, yeah, but that's the outward me. The inward me is, you know, and there was a time when people didn't really know who the inward me was. And so I have felt that, you know, there's no shame in talking about that we as individuals or we as leaders need help occasionally with everything that we're trying to balance. And then just that opening up, just sharing my side and what I experienced and how positive it was to me professionally and personally, really helped set the tone for that particular individual with the journey that they're going to go through. And that was, we connected in a way that we had, you know, never really connected before. So I think that, you know, we need to practice what we preach. We're all not perfect. We are all have, you know, professional stresses on us. We all have personal stresses on us. We all have familial stresses on us. We may have health issues. There might be some financial issues. I mean, there's a variety of things that we as leaders and the staff that work for us, there's constant pressures on our lives. And to assume that everybody has it together and is holding it together 7 days a week, 24 hours a day is not practical. And so to be empathetic. And so, you know, would I have done this interview 15 years ago? No, probably not. I try to be more authentic. Absolutely. I try to be my authentic self every single day. And sometimes my authentic self hits it out of the park, you know, batting 1,000. And then sometimes I strike out, but it's okay, because I have a new day that starts. And I think just offering ourselves that grace, and then offering that same grace to others, and showing the fact that we are vulnerable, really does help, I think, lower the stigma. And then I think it was that Buck that had mentioned earlier, during those times of crisis, you tend to have bonds that you'll never be able to replicate again.
Yeah, that's true. You know, I think about the work that we do with the Every Student Succeeding award and the video series that we've done over the last 7 years. And the thing that I keep hearing when I talk to people is watching stories like this makes me search out the Deja or the John or the Martin, because you never know what someone is going through. And so, to your point, Gayle, the need to offer grace, right? Not just to yourself, but to others, going, you know what? I don't know what's going on in their life,
Right.
but if I can provide grace in some form, then maybe their day might get a little bit better. Erin, for you, how do we work you are the president of this association. How do we work to really make some progress around destigmatizing mental health?
I think, as we've all mentioned today, you know, discussing the issues around mental health. I think we've been, you know, trying to teeter around mental health by, using, softer words like social, emotional, behavior, health related support, or even SEL. I think we really have to call it out, but also work with our parents and communities to say that, even though we know it's, this word is still, stigmatized in so many ways, right? There's so much need out in our community. And if we can get ahead of it, right? If we could be preventative, and we can provide all these resources before, right? A child or their family reaches their breaking point, right? How much better as a society and how much better our students and our families can be. And I think we just have to go deeper into those conversations. And that's by working with our communities, by working with our community agencies who know our families just quite well. And they know how to build and have those conversations and bring us, in those conversations too. And so in short, it's just by having those conversations, campaigning around those conversations, bringing those to our communities, having forums, whatever is needed to really tackle and mitigate, right, some of these things that are happening, but really have those deeper discussions around what mental health really is and the resources that are readily available for our students and families as well.
Buck, you get the last word when we talk about just what is a massive undertaking. How do we do more to foster these types of conversations and to really break down those barriers?
Well, I think that we take the lead in those conversations, that we have to have the courage to open them up, and also to let, the folks that are working with us and going to our schools know that it's very important for us that they're mentally healthy, that we care about folks, that the most important aspect of learning is that people need to feel safe and they need to feel loved before they're even going to be in a mindset where they're able to learn. And the more that we let folks know that that's a priority of our schools, I think the more people are going to be willing to let us know what their needs are. As far as what ACSA can do to help serve us, Michael, I think one of the great things that could happen is if there was kind of a set time with a set expert that could give pre-presentations, trainings, if you will, to folks about how to take care of themselves. I think that one of the things we've all talked about is that you got to take care of yourself before you can take care of others. So if ACSA could offer something on a standing basis where people could learn about how to take care of themselves and get some tips, that would be super helpful. And I know that this incredible series that you're starting has that as a bit of a goal, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely.
Yeah, all of those things are in the pipeline. I can tell you that. This doesn't stop on August 30th. This is simply a launching point. It is when I tell you we are working across all of the departments with ACSA right now to make mental health a priority, the professional development stuff that we're working on. There are webinars in the fall. We'll have so much more for you on our final episode on August 30th. But I will tell the three of you, and I will tell all of you who are watching, those things are in the works. I can promise you that. Erin, Buck, Gayle, this has been what a treat, what a pleasure. I appreciate you being so open with me, with the people who are watching this. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Michael.
Gayle, Buck, Michael, thank you.
Thank y'all. Wow. I hope that y'all enjoyed that as much as I did. This is, again, just the start of what is to come on this ACSA Mental Health Series, Your Mind First. We are really, really excited about next week's guest, and that will be the first partner of California, Jennifer Siebel-Newsom, will join us for a conversation that we expect to be very engaging and enlightening. And it's also an opportunity for you to ask your questions to the first partner. Again, that comes your way August 9th at 1 o'clock live on ACSA Facebook and YouTube. We're also asking that you share your story with us. There is a QR code. Our EdCal editor, Michelle Carl, may use some of your work-life balance and coping strategies in an upcoming EdCal article. You can visit the bit.ly link there, or you can access it through the QR code. Great way for if you didn't want to interact with us here on the broadcast, you can do so privately. So an opportunity for you there. We appreciate all of you who have been watching this debut episode of what we hope will be many episodes of Your Mind First, a real commitment to ACSA around mental health. For everyone who has worked on this project, I'm Michael Kelly. We'll see you next week.